Behind the polished red carpet image, some of the most admired women in entertainment quietly hold onto a habit that rarely appears in media campaigns or award show interviews. While Hollywood constantly promotes wellness, discipline, and flawless lifestyle branding, several stars continue to light up when the cameras turn away. For some, smoking is an old ritual tied to early fame. For others, it is a stress outlet born from pressure, scrutiny, and non-stop public expectations. But how much of this habit has shaped their careers, their health narratives, and even their most iconic on-set moments? And which beloved actress or singer hides a surprising long-term smoking routine fans rarely know about? Stay until the final reveal. The last name on this list may shock even longtime followers. 15. Kristen Stewart. Kristen Stewart's smoking habit has been documented for many years, but behind the candid paparazzi photos lies a far more layered story about pressure, identity, and the uneven transition from teenage fame to adult autonomy. When she first stepped into global recognition, her life changed overnight. The sudden intensity of blockbuster success placed her under a microscope, where every gesture, outfit, and expression was judged. Smoking, for her, became less of a style choice and more of a grounding ritual, a moment to create distance between her private self and the relentless expectations surrounding her. In interviews, Stewart described fame as something that never felt natural. She disliked the artificial polish Hollywood demanded, and often used cigarettes as a way to retreat from environments that felt staged or overwhelming. On film sets, crew members frequently noticed her stepping aside during breaks, not to isolate herself, but to regain emotional balance before returning to roles that required vulnerability or emotional complexity. These small, quiet pauses became part of her work rhythm, reflecting how deeply she internalized the psychological weight of performing under constant observation. Her smoking also ties into her long-standing struggle with anxiety. Stewart has openly explained how being watched, critiqued, and photographed without warning fed into a sense of vulnerability she carried from her teenage years. Cigarettes, though harmful, acted as a symbolic barrier, a momentary shield she could hold in her hand. As she matured, her image shifted from reluctant blockbuster star to respected independent actress. Instead of hiding her imperfections, she leaned into them, portraying characters who mirrored her own rough edges and introspective nature. Fans viewed this honesty as refreshing, especially in an industry obsessed with perfection. Stewart never crafted a sanitized public persona. She embraced authenticity even when it clashed with Hollywood's clean-cut expectations. Her smoking habit, while controversial, became part of that authenticity, a quiet, unspoken reminder that she never wanted to be the flawless, manufactured star others expected. Today, discussions around her habit often highlight a broader cultural divide: the tension between celebrity branding and the humanity of the people inside it. Kristen Stewart embodies this conflict more clearly than most. She remains a figure who resists artificial narratives, and her relationship with smoking ultimately reflects her larger journey, imperfect, honest, and unmistakably her own. 14. Rihanna. Rihanna's smoking habit has been a subject of public curiosity for years, partly because it contrasts so sharply with the powerful, glamorous image she projects on stage and in her fashion empire. Yet behind the polished red carpet appearances and billion-dollar business success lies a woman who has navigated extreme pressure from a young age. As she transitioned from a teenage breakout star to a global icon, Rihanna's life became defined by constant touring, studio deadlines, brand obligations, and unrelenting public scrutiny. Smoking gradually became one of the few private rituals she allowed herself a moment to slow down, to breathe, and to detach from the image the world endlessly projected onto her. In the early stages of her career, Rihanna was often portrayed as a carefree pop sensation, but insiders described a much more demanding reality. She juggled exhausting schedules, unpredictable travel, and high expectations from executives who saw her as a guaranteed hitmaker. Cigarettes became associated with brief pockets of solitude between photo shoots, rehearsals, and interviews. For someone living at a pace dictated almost entirely by others, these small moments offered a sense of ownership over her day. Even as gossip outlets published candid photos of her smoking, Rihanna rarely acknowledged the habit publicly, maintaining a respectful distance between her private choices and her public persona. As she expanded into fashion and beauty, the pressure intensified rather than eased. Fenty Beauty and Savage X. Fenty turned her into a symbol of inclusivity, modern entrepreneurship, and cultural influence. With that level of responsibility came new forms of stress, from managing creative teams to navigating the expectations placed on women leading global brands. Smoking remained a constant through these transitions, an unspoken reminder of how she processed overwhelm in a world that demanded perfection at every turn. Fans often express surprise that someone as effortlessly confident as Rihanna would lean on a habit associated with vulnerability and stress, but those close to her note that the habit aligns with her unfiltered authenticity. She has never pretended to be flawless or morally polished. Instead, she allows contradictions to exist within her. Glamorous yet grounded, bold yet reflective, powerful yet human. In a culture that often expects celebrities, especially women, to be role models free of messy habits, Rihanna's smoking highlights a simple truth. Immense success does not erase the need for coping mechanisms. Her relationship with smoking, though controversial, reinforces what makes her compelling. She is real, layered, and unapologetically complex. 13. Jennifer Lawrence. Jennifer Lawrence's smoking habit has long existed in the background of her public life, surfacing mostly through candid paparazzi images rather than deliberate self-presentation. Known for her humor, relatability, and spontaneity, Lawrence cultivated an image of the approachable A-lister, the actress who could joke on late-night shows and still command respect on award stages. But behind that light-hearted exterior is a career shaped by intense pressure, rapid success, and the psychological weight that comes with being branded America's sweetheart at a young age. Smoking, for her, developed quietly as a way to decompress from responsibilities that grew faster than she could process. Her breakout years were marked by non-stop filming schedules, global press tours, and the enormous responsibility of leading a billion-dollar franchise. The Hunger Games transformed her from a respected young actress into one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood almost instantly. With that came a demanding routine of promotional interviews, media appearances, and fan expectations, a cycle that left her with little time for stillness. Crew members from several productions recalled her slipping away for short smoking breaks, not as a form of rebellion but as a moment to let her mind recalibrate before returning to emotionally heavy scenes or the structured chaos of blockbuster sets. Lawrence has spoken openly about anxiety, describing how fame amplified her fears of public scrutiny and judgment. Smoking sometimes functioned as a grounding ritual, a familiar pause amid an environment that rarely paused for her. Those close to her mentioned that during high-stress periods, award seasons, press circuits, or performances requiring deep emotional intensity, these brief escapes helped her cope with internal pressure she rarely showed on camera. As she matured in Hollywood, Lawrence attempted to create firmer boundaries between her personal life and professional identity. She stepped back from public oversharing, guarded her private relationships more carefully, and became more selective about roles. Yet the candid photos of her smoking persisted, often contrasting with the glamorous fashion moments and highly curated media appearances she delivered. She never made an effort to deny or rebrand the habit. Instead, she allowed it to exist as a quiet part of her off-camera self, a reminder that no amount of fame eliminates the need for personal coping mechanisms. Her smoking habit also highlights a subtle tension in celebrity culture. Audiences crave authenticity, but often criticize the very traits that make stars human. Jennifer Lawrence embodies that contradiction. She is charismatic, hardworking, vulnerable, and imperfect, a combination that resonates with many. Smoking may not align with Hollywood's polished narrative, but for Lawrence, it represents the reality behind the spotlight, a life of intense pressure, complicated choices, and the search for small moments of normalcy within an extraordinary existence. 12. Miley Cyrus. Miley Cyrus's smoking habit is one of the most visible yet misunderstood aspects of her public life, woven into a career defined by reinvention, rebellion, and constant negotiation between personal freedom and cultural expectation. From her early days as a child star to her evolution into a genre-blending musician, Cyrus has lived under a spotlight that rarely allowed room for gradual self-discovery. Smoking emerged for her during a period when she was determined to break free from the carefully curated image imposed on her. It coincided with a time when she felt she needed control, even in the smallest of choices, after spending nearly her entire adolescence performing an identity scripted by others. As she transitioned out of her Disney persona, the public reacted with shock to nearly everything she did. Photos of her smoking became part of a larger narrative that unfairly portrayed her as reckless or chaotic. But for Cyrus, smoking wasn't about provoking headlines. It was tied to a deeper need to reclaim autonomy. On tour, where days blurred into a cycle of rehearsals, interviews, and performances, she often used short smoking breaks as a way to decompress. Crew members noticed that these moments allowed her to slow down, reflect, and create a mental boundary between the performance energy she projected and the inner conflict she navigated privately. Cyrus has spoken openly about anxiety, emotional pressure, and the way fame complicates even the simplest choices. Smoking became a ritual of familiarity amid environments that constantly changed: hotel rooms, studios, arenas, and sets where she rarely had space to simply exist without expectation. Behind the scenes, friends and collaborators often described her as thoughtful and introspective, someone who carried the weight of public misunderstanding while still trying to show kindness to the people around her. Cigarettes, though harmful, offered a temporary sense of calm in moments where she felt overstimulated or emotionally stretched. As her artistry matured, Cyrus reinvented herself again and again, moving from pop to country influences to rock, each era reflecting a different part of her inner landscape. Yet, even as her music became more personal, her smoking remained a private habit she never glamorized. She neither denied it nor used it to craft an edgy persona. Instead, she acknowledged it as a human flaw within a life otherwise shaped by relentless scrutiny. In many ways, Miley Cyrus's relationship with smoking reflects the larger arc of her career: raw, complicated, and honest. It represents the tension between who she was expected to be and who she chose to become, reminding fans that behind the glitter, controversy, and powerful performances is a woman still learning to navigate her own vulnerability. 11. Charlize Theron. Charlize Theron's smoking habit stands in noticeable contrast to the disciplined, almost superhuman physical transformations she has undergone throughout her career. Known for her intensity, her emotional depth, and her willingness to reshape her body for roles, Theron projects an image of precision and control. Yet behind that cinematic strength lies a private routine shaped by pressure, trauma, and the relentless standards imposed on actresses in Hollywood. Smoking, for her, has been less a symbol of rebellion and more a complex coping mechanism she developed during years when the industry demanded perfection, while offering little emotional support in return. Before she became an Oscar-winning performer, Theron faced a turbulent childhood marked by instability and trauma, experiences she later admitted left lasting emotional imprints. As she pursued acting, those unresolved feelings coexisted with the stress of navigating auditions, survival jobs, and the aggressive competitiveness of the industry. Smoking accompanied her through these early years, becoming a small ritual that offered a sense of grounding during a period when nothing else in her life felt steady. It continued even as her fame grew, though she never showcased the habit as part of her public identity. On film sets, Theron is known for her intensity training for grueling action scenes, pushing herself physically and immersing fully into psychologically demanding characters. Crew members frequently recalled her stepping away quietly during long shooting days for brief smoking breaks, moments she treated almost like meditation. These pauses helped her shift between emotional states, especially when transitioning from high adrenaline action scenes to quieter, character-driven moments. For an actress carrying the weight of leading roles, these small separations from the chaos of production were necessary resets. Theron has also spoken candidly about the pressure women face in Hollywood to maintain a polished, flawless image. The scrutiny placed on female stars, from their bodies to their aging to their personal habits, is far harsher than what male actors experience. This made her smoking habit something she largely kept private, not out of shame, but because she refused to allow it to be turned into a narrative about her worth or professionalism. Her focus has always been on the work, not the performative aspects of celebrity culture. As she expanded into producing and activism, the demands on her time grew heavier. Smoking, still a part of her personal life, functioned as a quiet pause amid overwhelming responsibility, the balance between leading film projects, raising children, and advocating for women's rights. Those who know her emphasize that she is deliberate, reflective, and fiercely independent, traits that align with the way she has handled her habit, without glamorization, without apology, and without letting it define her. Charlize Theron's relationship with smoking ultimately mirrors her broader journey, a life shaped by resilience, survival, discipline, and the unspoken emotional costs that accompany extraordinary success. 10. Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga's smoking habit has followed her throughout a career built on intensity, transformation, and the kind of emotional vulnerability that demands enormous inner strength. While the world often sees her as a boundary-pushing performer, the artist who reinvents herself with every era few understand the private pressure she carries behind the spectacle. For Gaga, smoking began as a ritual during her early days, as a struggling musician in New York, long before fame reshaped her life. In those years, cigarettes offered small pockets of comfort during late-night writing sessions, long rehearsals, and moments of doubt about whether she would ever break through. When she finally rose to global prominence, the demands of fame multiplied. Tours grew larger, schedules became relentless, and the pressure to maintain artistic innovation intensified. Gaga often spoke about how she poured everything into her work, sometimes at the expense of her own well-being. Smoking became a quiet companion during this period, a way to pause between performances, interviews, and the almost military-level discipline required for her choreography and vocal routines. Crew members often noticed her stepping outside venues or studios for a brief cigarette, using the moment to recenter herself before returning to the chaos of production. Her struggles with chronic pain, trauma, and mental health also shaped her relationship with the habit. Gaga has openly shared her battles with PTSD, anxiety, and fibromyalgia, conditions that intensified during her most demanding tours. These vulnerabilities contrasted sharply with the powerful, fearless persona she projected on stage. Smoking became a small, familiar act she could control, amid the unpredictable waves of emotional and physical discomfort she endured. It functioned less as a rebellious statement and more as an attempt to find stillness in a life defined by extremes. The media often captured her smoking during unguarded moments outside hotels, during breaks on film sets, or while relaxing with friends. Critics sometimes pointed to these images as contradictions of her advocacy for wellness and empowerment. But those who know her emphasize that Gaga has always embraced complexity rather than perfection. She never pretended to be a flawless symbol. Instead, she allowed the world to see her contradictions, her pain, and her humanity. As her artistry expanded into acting, activism, and business, the emotional weight on her shoulders only deepened. Smoking remained one of the few habits that connected her present self to her earliest creative beginnings, a reminder of the girl who wrote music in dim apartments, chasing a dream that felt impossible. Today, her relationship with smoking reflects the central themes of her life: resilience, struggle, honesty, and the difficult balance between the myth of the superstar and the reality of the person underneath. 9. Kate Winslet. Kate Winslet's smoking habit has long been a quiet but consistent part of her life, one that stands in contrast to the classic, graceful image many audiences associate with her. Rising to international fame in her early 20s, Winslet entered Hollywood during a moment when young actresses were expected to embody perfection physically, emotionally, and publicly. Yet behind the awards, the prestige, and the timeless performances, Winslet carried the pressures of sudden worldwide scrutiny. Smoking became a private routine that helped her navigate the overwhelming transition from working actress to global cinematic icon. During the years following her breakout, she spoke openly about the toll fame took on her self-perception. The attention she received was not only about her work but also her appearance, her weight, her relationships, and her choices. In interviews, Winslet admitted that the intense, often invasive commentary left her struggling with anxiety and self-doubt. Smoking emerged as a grounding mechanism, a way to reclaim a moment of silence during long days filled with makeup chairs, fittings, rehearsals, and back-to-back press obligations. Crew members from early productions described her stepping away briefly for a cigarette between demanding scenes, returning with a calmer focus that allowed her to fully disappear into her roles. As her career matured, Winslet gravitated toward characters with emotional depth, women dealing with trauma, loss, moral conflict, or societal pressure. These roles required a level of vulnerability that mirrored her own struggles behind the scenes. The emotional weight of such performances, combined with demanding filming schedules, added layers of stress to her life, and smoking often became a small ritual that helped her decompress. She never glamorized the habit or tried to turn it into an extension of her persona. Instead, she treated it as an imperfect but honest aspect of her private world. Winslet has also been vocal about the double standards placed on actresses. While male stars are often celebrated for rugged authenticity, women face harsher judgment for the smallest imperfections, including smoking. For that reason, she kept the habit relatively low profile, avoiding unnecessary attention or commentary. Friends have joked that a cigarette break was the rare moment she allowed herself to stop being Kate Winslet the actress and simply exist as Kate the human being. Her relationship with smoking becomes even more nuanced when viewed through the lens of motherhood. Winslet has spoken about trying to reduce the habit over the years, largely for her children, though stress from demanding roles sometimes caused temporary relapses. This journey reflects the broader reality for many working women, balancing personal flaws with professional expectations. Ultimately, Kate Winslet's smoking habit reveals something essential about her. She is grounded, imperfect, thoughtful, and deeply human. Behind the polished performances and iconic roles lies a woman navigating pressure, identity, and vulnerability, one cigarette break at a time. 8. Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie's smoking habit has followed her throughout a life shaped by extremes: global fame, humanitarian responsibility, deeply personal struggles, and a career filled with some of Hollywood's most demanding roles. While the world often sees her as a symbol of elegance, mystery, and strength, Jolie's private reality has always been far more complex. Smoking became part of her life long before she became an Oscar-winning icon, emerging during a period marked by emotional turbulence, family conflict, and a search for identity that played out under early media attention. For Jolie, cigarettes were never an accessory meant to enhance image. They were a coping mechanism tied to moments when the world felt overwhelming, unpredictable, or emotionally heavy. During her rise to stardom, public attention intensified rapidly. Interviews, photo shoots, and film sets became constants, leaving her little space to process the emotional weight she carried. Jolie has spoken openly about her struggles with anxiety, loneliness, and the feeling of being misunderstood, themes that echoed through many of her roles. Smoking became a form of mental pause between these demands, a ritual that provided a small sense of control, amid the relentless pace of celebrity life. Crew members frequently described her stepping outside between takes, not to create an edgy persona, but to reset emotionally before diving back into characters who required intensity, physical transformation, or psychological depth. Her complicated relationship with fame also contributed to the habit's persistence. Jolie never fully embraced the glamorous expectations imposed on actresses. She preferred honesty, even when it conflicted with Hollywood's polished image. This included her smoking, which she never glamorized or turned into part of her public identity. Instead, it existed quietly in the margins of her life, surfacing mostly through paparazzi photos taken during unguarded moments outside hotels, on set, or while traveling with her children. Motherhood brought new layers to her life, reshaping her priorities, but not erasing the stresses that came with balancing global humanitarian missions, personal relationships, health battles, and the emotional responsibility of raising a large family. Jolie has spoken about trying to reduce smoking for her children's sake, yet the pressures she navigated, diplomatic trips, medical decisions, and intense media scrutiny often triggered the habit's return. For her, cigarettes acted as temporary anchors during periods filled with emotional uncertainty. As she evolved into a filmmaker, activist, and advocate for human rights, the demands on her time and spirit only deepened. Smoking, though widely criticized, remained a deeply personal ritual tied to processing grief, fatigue, and the emotional weight of her work. Jolie's habit ultimately reflects the duality of her life, extraordinary impact balanced against private vulnerability. Behind the global icon is a woman navigating pain, responsibility, and humanity, one quiet, unfiltered moment at a time. 7. Adele. Adele's smoking habit has been part of her life story long before she became one of the most powerful voices of her generation. Known for her soulful sound, emotional honesty, and deeply personal songwriting, Adele built her career on rawness rather than perfection. Yet behind the effortless vocals and Grammy-winning performances lies a woman who has navigated pressure, insecurity, and the emotional weight of global stardom. Smoking entered her life early, tied to moments of anxiety, creative frustration, and the overwhelming expectations placed on her as she transitioned from a London teenager into an international phenomenon. When Adele first rose to fame, the industry immediately placed extraordinary demands on her voice. She became the rare artist whose instrument was both her livelihood and her vulnerability. Smoking, ironically, became a coping mechanism during the very years when she was expected to protect her vocal cords at all costs. She openly admitted the contradiction, acknowledging that the habit was destructive, but also difficult to let go, because it provided a familiar grounding rhythm in the chaos of sudden fame. Long recording sessions, isolating hotel nights, and intense emotional writing periods often saw her stepping outside for a cigarette to calm her nerves or gather her thoughts. Her struggles with stage fright added another layer to the habit. Despite her global success, Adele repeatedly described performing live as a terrifying experience, something that triggered panic and self-doubt. Before concerts, she relied on small rituals to manage the pressure, one of them being a quiet smoke break, which she treated as a moment to breathe before facing audiences who expected perfection every night. Crew members recalled her pacing backstage with a cigarette in hand, using the brief solitude to steady her emotions. Adele's honesty about smoking also revealed the tension between her personal life and public image. Fans often saw her as relatable, grounded, and unaffected by fame, yet she faced immense scrutiny over her appearance, lifestyle, and habits. Throughout interviews, she pushed back against unrealistic expectations, insisting that being in the spotlight did not erase her human flaws. Smoking became one of the many things she refused to hide or sanitize for the sake of celebrity branding. Her vocal surgery in the past forced her to confront the consequences of the habit, and although she worked to reduce her smoking afterward, the emotional connection to the ritual didn't disappear immediately. Even as she matured into a more private, thoughtful phase of her life, the habit lingered in the background, resurfacing during stressful periods or moments of emotional strain. Ultimately, Adele's relationship with smoking reflects her larger journey, one marked by vulnerability, resilience, and an ongoing effort to navigate life's pressures while staying true to herself. Behind the unmatched voice and global acclaim is a woman still learning, still growing, and still confronting the imperfect parts of her story with honesty and courage. 6. Scarlett Johansson. Scarlett Johansson's smoking habit has been a quietly persistent part of her life, appearing in candid photos and behind-the-scenes accounts long before she became one of Hollywood's highest-paid actresses. While audiences often associate her with sleek action roles, polished red carpet appearances, and a carefully refined public presence, Johansson's off-camera world has always been far more nuanced. Smoking emerged early in her adulthood, during a period when she was navigating the difficult transition from child performer to serious actress, a phase marked by pressure, self-reinvention, and constant evaluation from an industry that rarely gives young women room to evolve naturally. As Johansson's career gained momentum, her schedule became increasingly demanding, filming back-to-back projects, undergoing intense physical training, and sustaining the emotional weight required for complex characters took a toll on her mental equilibrium. Cigarettes became a momentary refuge, a brief ritual that allowed her to step away from overwhelming environments and decompress. Crew members often recalled her stepping outside during long production days, using the quiet moments to reset before returning to demanding action sequences or scenes requiring emotional precision. These small breaks weren't about cultivating an image, but about creating a pocket of stillness within a highly structured and high-pressure career. Johansson has acknowledged that fame, though rewarding, comes with challenges she was unprepared for. The constant exposure, the loss of anonymity, and the public scrutiny of her relationships and personal choices shaped the way she coped. Smoking offered a sense of familiarity amid an unstable landscape, especially during years when she worked tirelessly to redefine herself as more than a former teen star. Despite criticism, especially from media outlets that judged female celebrities more harshly than their male counterparts, she refused to perform perfection or pretend she lived a flawless lifestyle. Her advocacy for privacy also played a role in how the habit remained largely unspoken. Johansson has always guarded her personal life, resisting the pressure to disclose more than she is comfortable with. Smoking became one of the many aspects of her identity that she kept separate from her public persona. Even as paparazzi images circulated, she never turned the habit into an aesthetic or a statement. Instead, it existed quietly in the margins of her life, a private ritual she neither glorified nor apologized for. As Johansson matured, taking on new roles as a mother, producer, and advocate for women in the industry, the emotional and logistical pressures of her life evolved. Yet cigarettes continued to surface during high-stress periods, reflecting the enduring connection between the habit and her internal landscape. The contradiction between the disciplined performer audiences see and the private individual who turns to smoking reveals a deeper truth about her. Beneath the confidence and strength lies a woman coping with the same vulnerabilities, uncertainties, and pressures that fame often magnifies. 5. Kristen Bell. Kristen Bell's smoking habit often surprises fans because it contrasts sharply with the cheerful, optimistic persona she embodies in her public appearances and comedic roles. Known for her bright energy, sharp wit, and wholesome image, Bell has built a career on characters who feel approachable and emotionally grounded. Yet behind that sunny exterior lies a woman who, like many in the industry, has navigated stress, pressure, and personal anxieties far more complex than the public typically sees. Smoking became part of her routine during periods when she was juggling heavy workloads, private emotional struggles, and the unspoken expectations placed on actresses to maintain a flawless, positive facade at all times. During the early years of her career, Bell faced the uncertainty of auditions, the instability of short-term roles, and the constant cycle of proving herself in a competitive environment. Cigarettes became a small but consistent grounding mechanism, a moment to pause, breathe, and steady herself between the waves of self-doubt that often accompany young performers trying to establish footing in Hollywood. She never used the habit to seem rebellious or edgy. Instead, it functioned as a quiet ritual that helped her manage the emotional turbulence of breaking into an unforgiving industry. As her career evolved and she landed long-term roles, the pressures shifted. Fame brought new layers of responsibility, maintaining a marketable image, balancing personal and professional demands, and navigating the scrutiny of both fans and the media. Behind the scenes, co-workers sometimes noted that Bell stepped out briefly for a cigarette during long filming days, especially before emotionally heavy scenes or after intense comedic sequences that required significant energy and precision. These smoke breaks offered a rare moment of solitude amid environments filled with cameras, deadlines, and expectation. Bell has been open about her battles with anxiety and depression, candidly discussing the internal challenges she faces despite her upbeat public persona. This vulnerability provides deeper context for her smoking habit, highlighting how it intertwined with her attempts to manage overwhelming emotions, intrusive thoughts, and moments of mental exhaustion. For her, cigarettes were less about image and more about emotional regulation, especially during periods when she felt stretched thin by work demands or internal struggles she was still learning to articulate. Her roles as a mother and advocate for mental health added further complexity. While she has expressed a desire to reduce habits that conflict with her long-term well-being, the stress of balancing family, advocacy, acting, and public expectation has at times made the habit difficult to entirely leave behind. The contradiction between her polished public image and her private reliance on smoking underscores a broader truth. Even those who appear endlessly upbeat carry unseen burdens. Kristen Bell's relationship with smoking ultimately reflects her deeper humanity, imperfect, introspective, resilient, and far more layered than the bright, effortless persona the world sees. Behind every laugh and every confident performance is a woman navigating pressure, identity, and emotional complexity in her own quiet way. 4. Keira Knightley. Keira Knightley's smoking habit has long existed in the quieter corners of her life, emerging in glimpses captured by paparazzi or shared by colleagues who have worked closely with her. Known for her poised presence, sharp intelligence, and sophisticated on-screen elegance, Knightley built a career on performances that combine emotional restraint with underlying vulnerability. Yet behind that polished exterior is someone who has battled intense pressure since adolescence. Smoking became part of her life during the early years of fame, when she was thrust into global recognition before she had fully understood who she wanted to be. For Knightley, cigarettes were never about glamour. They were an anchor, a small ritual that helped her cope with the overwhelming demands of sudden stardom. Her breakout roles placed her under a level of scrutiny far beyond what most young actors experience. Every detail of her appearance was analyzed. Tabloids dissected her weight, her personal life, her clothing, and even her expressions on the red carpet. Knightley later revealed that this level of invasive criticism deeply affected her self-confidence. Smoking became a way to create breathing room between herself and the noise of public judgment, a quiet moment where she could detach from the unrealistic expectations imposed on her. During long filming days, colleagues often noticed her slipping away for a cigarette in between emotionally demanding scenes, using the brief solitude to gather her thoughts before returning to the intensity of performance. Knightley has also spoken about her struggles with anxiety and panic attacks during the height of her fame. The pressure to remain composed, graceful, and articulate in every interview drained her emotionally, even as she delivered exceptional performances. Cigarettes, while unhealthy, provided a familiar rhythm she associated with calmness, a momentary pause, in a life where she was constantly expected to be perfect. These smoke breaks acted as mental resets, helping her navigate the psychological weight that accompanied being a young woman under constant public evaluation. As she matured, Knightley became selective about her roles, choosing projects that aligned with her values and offered emotional depth. Yet the pressures didn't disappear. Balancing acting, parenthood, and personal well-being added new layers of stress. Friends and co-workers noted that smoking sometimes resurfaced during challenging production periods, reflecting how the habit remained connected to moments of emotional overwhelm. She never glamorized the behavior nor attempted to integrate it into her public persona. Instead, she kept it private, understanding how quickly the media would use it to construct narratives that reduced her complexity to a single trait. Keira Knightley's relationship with smoking reflects the underlying truth behind her composed exterior. She is thoughtful, sensitive, imperfect, and deeply affected by the pressures of fame. Her habit reveals the quieter battles she navigates, while portraying some of cinema's most memorable characters, battles rooted in expectation, identity, anxiety, and the search for pockets of stillness in a life that rarely slows down. 3. Cameron Diaz. Cameron Diaz's smoking habit has been part of her public narrative for decades, often appearing in candid photos long before social media magnified celebrities' private lives. Known for her radiant energy, athletic lifestyle, and effortless comedic timing, Diaz built a career on characters full of confidence and spontaneity. But behind the sunny Californian persona is a woman who has navigated an enormous amount of pressure, insecurity, and identity conflict, especially during her busiest years as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Smoking entered her life early and remained a recurring ritual through the peaks and valleys of her fame, functioning as a coping mechanism far more than a stylistic choice. When Diaz rose to stardom in her early 20s, she was thrust into an industry that demanded relentless perfection. Film studios, interviewers, and magazine editors all wanted her to embody a very specific image: the carefree, charming blonde, whose life seemed effortlessly happy. Off-camera, however, Diaz dealt with the stress of non-stop schedules, body scrutiny, and the emotional strain of being transformed into a global symbol. Smoking became a momentary escape from the spotlight, a small break where she could detach from the expectations and recenter herself. Crew members from various productions recalled her stepping aside for quick smoke breaks, using the quiet moments to prepare mentally before returning to demanding scenes or long shooting days. Despite her commitment to fitness and healthy living, Diaz openly acknowledged the contradiction of her smoking habit. For years, she described it as one of the last personal habits she struggled to control, rooted not in rebellion, but in the emotional chaos she experienced during Hollywood's golden period of her career. Cigarettes became associated with late-night filming, long downtime in trailers, and the emotional resets required to maintain energy on physically demanding sets. Even as she embraced yoga, mindfulness, and wellness practices, the habit lingered, tied to stress cycles that were difficult to fully break. As Diaz transitioned into more dramatic roles, and later into a more private life, the emotional pressures shifted. Fame became less thrilling and more exhausting. The non-stop attention, paparazzi culture, and lack of personal privacy pushed her toward a quieter existence. During these years, smoking occasionally resurfaced, especially during stressful transitions, career changes, relationship challenges, or periods of self-reflection, where she re-evaluated her identity outside of Hollywood's expectations. Her eventual decision to step away from acting was partly driven by a desire to reclaim control of her life. Away from the cameras, Diaz focused on health, family, and personal well-being. While she publicly shared that she worked hard to reduce and eventually quit smoking, the long history of the habit reveals how deeply it was intertwined with her emotional landscape. Cameron Diaz's smoking story is ultimately a reflection of the complex humanity behind her glowing public persona. She is joyful yet anxious, disciplined yet imperfect, grounded yet vulnerable, a woman who spent years balancing global fame with the quiet, private rituals that helped her survive it. 2. Drew Barrymore. Drew Barrymore's smoking habit is deeply tied to the turbulent, chaotic, and often painful journey she experienced in the spotlight from childhood. Unlike many celebrities who adopt the habit later in life, Barrymore grew up in an environment where adulthood arrived far too early. Thrown into fame as a young child, surrounded by unstable influences, and navigating a family environment marked by addiction and emotional instability, she entered Hollywood with almost no protection. Smoking became part of her life during those early, vulnerable years, not as a stylistic choice, but as a reflection of the blurred boundaries between childhood and the adult world she was forced into. Her teenage years were marked by intense public scrutiny and personal struggle. Barrymore has openly discussed her past with substance abuse, unstable relationships, and the emotional wounds created during a period when she lacked support and guidance. Cigarettes, for her, became a familiar ritual, something that offered a fleeting sense of calm in moments filled with fear, confusion, and emotional overwhelm. Paparazzi photos from her early 20s frequently captured her smoking, usually during moments when she appeared deep in thought or visibly exhausted from the pressures of rebuilding her life and career. As she matured, Barrymore's career transformed dramatically. She evolved from a troubled former child star into a successful actress, producer, and later talk show host with a reputation for kindness, authenticity, and emotional resilience. But even as her public image softened and stabilized, her smoking habit remained a small yet persistent reminder of the coping mechanisms she relied on during her most difficult years. On film sets, co-workers often noticed her stepping outside between scenes, using the brief solitude of a cigarette break to process intense emotions or decompress after high-energy comedic performances. These moments were less about image and more about grounding herself amid the unique emotional pressures of performing. Barrymore's relationship with smoking became even more complex as she entered motherhood. She spoke publicly about wanting to create a healthier environment for her children and discussed her attempts to quit, acknowledging both her progress and her setbacks with refreshing honesty. For her, smoking has always been intertwined with emotional survival, a habit rooted in trauma, nostalgia, and the long shadow of a childhood spent in environments no child should ever have faced. Today, Barrymore carries an aura of warmth, reflection, and growth, but smoking remains one of the few remnants of her past that occasionally resurfaces. It serves as a reminder that healing is rarely linear, and that even the most positive, resilient individuals continue to grapple with old habits shaped by formative pain. Her story is not one of glamour, but of perseverance. A woman who rebuilt her life from chaos, who learned to forgive herself, and who continues to navigate her vulnerabilities one day at a time. 1. Madonna. Madonna's smoking habit has been part of her complex, ever-evolving relationship with fame, rebellion, and self-expression for decades. As one of the most influential entertainers in modern history, she has spent her life pushing boundaries, challenging cultural norms, and living under a level of scrutiny that few public figures have ever experienced. Smoking entered her life during the earliest years of her career, long before she became a global icon. For Madonna, cigarettes were tied to the gritty artistic world she inhabited in New York. Late-night rehearsals, underground clubs, and the raw, creative environments where she began shaping her identity. The habit was never about image alone. It became a quiet companion through years defined by both meteoric success and intense emotional strain. During her rise to superstardom, the pressures on Madonna grew staggering. She carried the weight of relentless media criticism, controversial public reactions, and the expectation to constantly reinvent herself. Every era demanded a new look, a new sound, a new message, and a new emotional investment. Smoking often appeared during the quieter transitions between these extremes, moments when she stepped away from rehearsals, creative meetings, or draining interviews to recalibrate. Crew members from her tours recalled that cigarette breaks sometimes acted as the only pauses in days, packed with choreography, vocal training, costume preparations, and high-stakes performances. Her relationship with fame has always been complicated. While Madonna thrived on artistic control and provocation, she also endured constant backlash. The criticism targeted everything: her image, her age, her personal life, her activism, her music, even her spirituality. These attacks took an emotional toll, and smoking became one of the small, familiar rituals she returned to in moments of frustration, exhaustion, or reflection. It allowed her to carve out brief pockets of solitude within a life that demanded perpetual performance. As the years progressed, Madonna's body also became a major part of the public conversation. Her fitness, her aging, her surgeries, her choices. This scrutiny intensified the emotional pressure she carried. Smoking, though at odds with the disciplined lifestyle she maintained for her career, persisted as a silent reminder of the vulnerability beneath her armor. Friends and collaborators often described her as fiercely driven yet deeply sensitive, someone who internalized criticism even when she outwardly dismissed it. Cigarettes filled the small gaps between her strength and her fragility. Madonna's habit reveals a truth rarely seen in her public persona. Behind the fearless trailblazer is a human being shaped by anxiety, exhaustion, and the relentless demands of reinvention. Her smoking reflects the emotional weight of sustaining a decades-long legacy in an industry that constantly pushes women to prove themselves again and again. Ultimately, Madonna's relationship with smoking is not about glamour or rebellion, it is about survival. It represents the private, unfiltered moments of a woman who has spent her entire life performing strength while carrying the hidden cost of being an icon. Behind every spotlight, every flawless photo shoot, and every carefully crafted public persona, these women carry private battles the world rarely sees. Smoking, though controversial and unhealthy, became a coping mechanism for many of them, a quiet ritual in lives shaped by pressure, scrutiny, and expectations that never pause. Their stories remind us that fame does not erase vulnerability, and iconic status does not shield anyone from stress, anxiety, or emotional complexity. As we peel back the layers of their private realities, we see not just celebrities, but human beings navigating imperfect choices in an imperfect world. If you found this look behind the curtain compelling, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more eye-opening journeys into the unseen sides of Hollywood life.